Yeah, thank you guys. Good to be with everybody today. Happy Tuesday for you. It's a lovely sunset here in San Diego, and just finishing a busy day of work. I wanted to share tonight on a theme of our body as a temple, but maybe not from the health food standpoint, but maybe from a different point of view, but just talk about a little bit about that idea, which may be a phrase we've heard in the past, but I'll maybe give it a different meaning, but our body as a temple. What we can do as usual, just to help us to settle in, is just reset with some meditation. So we find a comfortable position, typically, having our back upright. That helps to find that right balance between being awake or being alert and also relaxed. But really, we can meditate anywhere at any time. We take a deep breath in and out. And then another breath, and just invite ourselves to relax. And then a third breath, and just ask ourselves, what is important now? And then we can contemplate this analogy. So this is a traditional analogy. Think of each of our senses as being like a different kind of animal. Like our eyes, for example, maybe they're like an eagle or something. But imagine that all of these animals were tied together. So your five sense powers, your sense of sight, smell, touch, hearing, and so forth, and your mental power, your mind. Imagine that these five senses and your mental awareness, these six senses, are all animals that are tied together. They're going to be dragged off in the direction of whichever one is strongest. So normally for us, our mental awareness is the strongest sense. Our mind tends to go off into the past or into the future, thinking about this, imagining that, having conversations. But we need to be bringing our attention back, for example, to our body sense awareness and to our other sense awarenesses, just to begin to counterbalance the strength of our mind. Not that thinking is bad, but it's probably overpowering our other experience. We pay attention to our bodily sensation in particular. As we breathe in and out, where can we feel that? How does that feel for us? As we become aware of our body, does our bodily feeling change? Does our body feel different when we're paying attention to it? Is our breathing different when we're paying attention to it? And although we can say in general we are learning meditation, it's much more important to think we're learning how to work with ourself. We're learning how to work with our own mind. We're learning what meditation is like for us. And no one has ever done that before. That's unique to our situation right now. If our attention gets dragged away by our thoughts, we just bring it back to our bodily awareness. Again, when we focus on our body, does the feeling in our body change? When we focus on our breathing, does our breathing change in some way? Just becoming aware. When we're focusing on our body, we have the opportunity to allow it to relax. When we forget about our body, we lose that opportunity. But as our body relaxes, becomes more settled, even our thinking begins to change. And then we can shift our attention to gratitude and just bring to mind someone or something that we're grateful for. When we have that sense of gratitude, we also try to notice, do we feel that in our body anywhere? We may or may not. We just check. And then with this feeling of gratitude, we can develop an intention for our brief time here. We just think, may we use this time to strengthen our good habits, our attention that we use for listening, our contemplation, our good heart, our peace of mind. Strengthening these mental pathways is like sowing seeds that can lead to dramatic different results in future. And with this motivation, we can open our eyes and rise from our meditation. So great to see you all, and great to be with you all. The analogy that I mentioned in the meditation about these 6 animals pulling on one another. That might have been an unusual analogy for me to just drop into your meditation, but I heard about that for the first time just a few months ago. But it really struck me as interesting. These 6 animals all being tied together, naturally, whichever one is stronger is going to drag the rest off in some direction. If so, for example, dogs are very strongly oriented towards sense of smell, and you can imagine a dog just being carried away by their sense of smell, right? But if it's time to eat, then maybe they're carried away by their sense of taste, right? And different animals, I would imagine an eagle or something very strongly focused on sense of sight, vision, that has the strongest impact for them. Now, human beings are naturally have a lot of mental capacity, but modern people, we really pride ourselves on mental capacity. Most of us probably have mental jobs, and that's, what we do, even in our downtime, we're looking at the internet or watching TV, and so we're thinking, so much thinking. So of these 6 senses, our 5 senses and our mental awareness, for humans, typically our mental awareness is the one that really drags us off, and we get totally caught up in that. Very powerful. And we get dragged off in the sense that that's what captures our attention. And whatever captures your attention is, I've compared in the past our attention to being like the steering wheel in a car. Wherever that steering wheel goes, that's where the car is going to go. So it may, to me, it certainly always seemed a little bit unusual. Why such a focus on bringing us back to our senses in at least some traditions of meditation? But this is the reason, because our senses just serve as a cantilever or counterbalance to our mental awareness. Our senses are gathering data right now. Our bodily sense in particular is gathering data from all over our body right now, and helps us to rein in our intellect, which is so powerful. But again, this question, the point is not that our intellect is bad. The point is just that it's so strong. You're so smart. You have such a good mind that it may be throwing you a little bit out of balance, right? Because our mind can send us into these unhelpful loops. And so one of the things we're doing with meditation, just reining in that our mind, our mental power. So to tell a bit of a story about that. So let me launch into the lofty world of philosophy. I'm not trained in philosophy, but I know a couple of things. So Western thought is very heavily influenced by Descartes, and Descartes had this idea, can't come to be known as Cartesian dualism, that there are things of the mind, and then there's extant things or physical things, and the two are totally separate. Things of the mind and physical things. And so there's our body, but then there's our mind, and all mental things are just totally different space. And so in the West, we've tended to get very focused on the mind as like this pure rational space. It's just this space, ideally, of pure reason, where Descartes said you can do math, you can do reasoning, you can do all this kind of logical analysis. And so a lot of our jobs are just thinking jobs. And there's not really much expectation that we should, well, there's not really much, at least for me, there was not much assumption that my body had anything to do with it. My body was what got me to my computer and what I used to type, and otherwise most of it's just mental activity doing all the work. Just in the last couple of weeks, I've been struck by some strong insomnia because I had meetings at 7 a.m. every day, and then through the weekends as well at 7 a.m. because I'm doing some special project on the weekend, and then going to bed late. And then my brain just started at some point saying 4:30 is the right time to wake up to get ready for all these 7 a.m. meetings. So my brain will be fully primed. At 7 a.m. I'll be peak energy level, right? As opposed to waking up groggy at 7 and hitting your peak energy level at 10 a.m. I'm hitting my peak energy level at 7 a.m. because I didn't get any sleep the night before. And now it's like getting me up at 2 a.m. 2 a.m. I'm like, okay, great. All right, let's take on some great project. Needless to say, my wife not so enthusiastic about going to bed at 6:30. So I'm kind of squeezing the clock at both sides. And so just yesterday, I decided that the entire world was a complete and utter disaster, and everything that was going on at work and so forth was a complete disaster, and everything's a disaster. And I started, drafting in my mind emails, resignations and this and that and all this, how do you respond to a disaster, of course, pulling the emergency lever. And then I thought, hey, wait a second. I've got a feeling maybe sleep deprivation is factoring into this a little bit. I tend to be much less enthusiastic, let alone less sharp, when I've not gotten a good night's sleep. So what's that all about? From one point of view, my mind should be independent of this body that's not getting sleep, right? But the two obviously play off of each other a lot, right? The food that you eat, drinking caffeine or this or that, all of these things, our body and our mind, they play off of each other a lot, right? And so I was, today I canceled some of my meetings and I tried to take a nap, and I'm terrible at taking naps, so it didn't work out very well. But I lay in bed, and one of the things I was noticing is when I really focused on relaxing in my body, my breathing would become very deep, right? Just deep and smooth. And then I would get a brilliant idea. And I have a lot of brilliant ideas, right? Because of all the energy I'm trying to pump into this brain, right? And then as soon as I get a brilliant idea, I'm like, okay, how do we do this? And I would notice my breathing would get like a bit intense, as if like I was about to start running. And then I'm like, okay, pull it back, right? And then my breathing would go like, okay, settling down, and then like a deeper rhythm of breathing, right? So it's a funny thing how our breath and our mind, our mental state, they kind of play back and forth between each other. And if your mind is very excited, your breath will, prepare to be excited, prepare to rush and run and so forth. And a lot of this has been talked about. You might have read articles that said similar things or read papers or whatever, but it's really so different when you start to observe that difference in your own body, right? So that's really our challenge. It's not to know intellectually that there's some interplay between these. It's to feel, what's it feel like when I get excited mentally? What's it feel like when I get tense? What's it feel like when I'm relaxed? What's it feel like when I bring my mind into my body? And so that was when it occurred to me earlier today to share about our body as a temple. So I've heard that expression a lot. I think I've heard that expression in the context of people promoting health food or like weightlifting programs. Your body's a temple, you need to look after it. I've spent a fair amount of time in temples, Buddhist temples, a bit of time in Christian churches, and a little bit of time in some other, synagogues and Hindu temples and so forth. The main characteristic, but I'd never really thought about that expression very much, our body is a temple. The main characteristic of temples, in my mind, is that they are staffed by a very small group of very dedicated volunteers, and that otherwise they're a little bit under attended to. So people are not, necessarily attending to the temple as well as they are, for example, a marketplace or, there are certain places that naturally gather a crowd, right? A bar, a restaurant, right? A shopping bazaar, a construction site, right? These things naturally gather a lot of people and money and time and energy and so forth. Temples are put together or are maintained by typically a fairly small crew of dedicated volunteers who are very sincere but overworked. And I was thinking there's a bit of a parallel to our body being a temple in that sense. Like normally our attention is on the restaurants, right? And the bars and the shopping malls and the news conferences and so forth. But the so-called temple of our body doesn't get a lot of foot traffic, doesn't get a lot of attention. Our mind doesn't visit and stay and abide in our body very often. Our mind is typically off doing something else, something much more important or much more urgent, probably more to the point. But you come into your body and it's got a very different energy. Like a temple has a very different energy from a restaurant, right? Yeah, and of course it varies, right? But typically quite quiet, right? Sometimes it's a place where there's teachings given or prayers and so forth, but often it's just a place that's quite quiet, a place perhaps to contemplate, a place to just come and sit. And you generally have no obligation when you go to a temple, except maybe you should probably put a donation in, but otherwise you've got no obligation. You just come in and just sit there and then contemplate. And I was thinking our body's a little bit like that. When we come into our body, we have no obligation. There's no job to be done. There's nothing particularly exciting going on. But from one point of view, there's a lot to be contemplated. So we think about our body, we've been dragging it around with us for a whole bunch of decades. And it's been looking after us and serving us and sustaining us and keeping us alive and so forth. But we may not have spent a whole lot of time just resting in it and thinking about it and noticing things like, what is the pattern of our breathing? Where do we carry stress in our body? And what is our body really all about in a sense? And that's the thing about contemplation. Contemplation just means giving yourself time to think about more profound topics. But if you think about inside our body, there's a lot going on that's quite significant for us that we may know about theoretically from school. There's your breath, your heart's beating, and blood pumping and so forth. But we may not have spent much time really feeling that and experiencing that ourselves directly. One of the certainly, so in many spiritual traditions and maybe some secular traditions as well, there's a lot of focus on the heart, in particular within the body. And I don't know what scientific literature there might be to back up, the importance of the area of our heart in terms of our actual emotional life and so forth. But from an experiential point of view, and even in terms of the language that we use, like heartfelt feeling, and we click heart emojis if we want to like something. Clearly, there's something very psychologically significant for us about this place inside our body. I don't know what the technical reasons are, but there's something very psychologically significant. One of the things I noticed when I was lying in bed is that when I was thinking, I would be thinking up in my head. But when I would relax and focus on my breathing, my attention would settle into my heart. And there is a kind of warmth and a kind of comfort there. And even, if you have a hug with somebody, there's a feeling like there's a soothing feeling, right? There's a feeling of relaxation potentially in the heart. So something special about that area. And you can think of the heart as being like the central shrine, or the central feature within this temple of our body. And just as if you'd visited a temple and you wanted to sit in front of the central feature, and that's what you do when you go to a temple, you sit in front of the central feature, right? What's at the real shrine in the heart of that temple. So when we think of our body as a temple, we bring our attention to our heart. And we just contemplate, because there is, in fact, a lot that we can learn. And the relationship between our body and mind, it's a two-way relationship, right? When our mind gets excited, there's changes in our body, or when our mind gets relaxed, there's changes in our body. But when our body relaxes and our body changes, it can even change the way we're thinking, right? And change the way we're feeling. So whether we take the time to meditate and try to get in touch with this inner world, including this inner physical world of our body as a temple, whether we take that time or not, what's going on in our body is always influencing how we behave and how we think and how we respond. I don't know if you've ever met, there are some people who are in chronic pain all the time, for example. And if you're in chronic pain, it's hard for that not to affect your outlook on the world, right? From one point of view, if you're in chronic pain, it can cause you to find some deeper peace, right, to allow you to endure that. And so some people who are in chronic pain are incredibly peaceful, or they have a lot more resilience than many people. But often, right, there's a heaviness, right? There can be a lot of worldviews or outlooks on the world that are influenced partly by a sense of physical pain. If we're not comfortable in our body, that I suspect you do, but that feeling where something's not right and you don't know what it is. And it's like, okay, what can I do now that would make me feel better? Do I want to go out? Do I want to watch TV? Do I want to eat something? And our mind kind of squirming and thinking about this and that and trying to find something nice to do, or something to make us feel better. I think on one level, we're probably in that state all the time to some degree. And then there are some times when maybe it's very pronounced, where we're just like, I'm just feeling terrible. What would make me feel better? That terrible feeling, there's probably something inside our body that's just not feeling at ease, right? There's some lack of sense of well-being, right? And where there is a lack of a feeling, an inner feeling of well-being, we will squirm, right? We'll squirm. We'll try to get away from the discomfort. We'll try to move towards anything that'll make us feel better. But if we bring our attention inside, we can begin to become aware if there's tension, begin to settle our breathing, begin to bring our attention to our heart, begin to allow our body to tonify or become more balanced, then it can begin to change our whole outlook. So when you arise from meditation, the world is at least slightly more bearable, perhaps, or at least slightly, yeah, bearable is probably a good word. So anyway, that was what I wanted to share today. That having some respect for this inner space of the body and visiting it and spending some time there and just seeing what unfolds, seeing what experiences unfold in our body. So that's what I wanted to share. So why don't we take a bit of time just to conclude with meditation related to that, thinking of our body as a temple and visiting that, spending a bit of time inside, and then noticing when we rush out the door to go do this and that, and then inviting ourselves, just come back, just settle in for a little bit. Okay, so again, we can find a posture for meditation that serves us. And when we take this first deep breath, we are very simply returning to our body. When we take the second deep breath, we're inviting ourselves to settle in to our body. And when we take this third deep breath, we're asking ourselves consciously, what is important now? So just like visiting the temple of our body, we have no obligation. We can simply come into the heart, settle in, and just contemplate and just watch and just rest. Just see what we learn. If we notice our mind running for the exit, we invite it to come back in to this temple of our body. Regardless of our what doctrine or lack of doctrine we hold, we can feel there's something sacred about our breath, about our heart. Something sacred. There's nothing very dramatic going on inside our body. It's just a nice place to sit, nice place to be and rest. Our mind can take us anywhere in the world, but for now, the temple of our body is just a nice place to be, to rest. If we notice our mind heading for the exit, going somewhere more exciting, we can invite ourselves to just come back in, sit in front of the shrine at our heart. Every experience we have, especially every action we take, changes us. The action of entering the temple of our body with our attention changes us. We've strengthened this habit like a tiny, we've deepened this pathway. These habits, they're also like seeds, in that the habits we strengthen, the pathways we strengthen, can cause dramatically different results in the future. So we can think through visiting the temple of our body today. May this be the cause of our awakening our heart, having a heart that's fully awakened, fully alive. A heart that we can then radiate benefit from to everyone around us. Then as we open our eyes and leave this temple of our body temporarily, we can remember that we can always return, come back, find a place of solace and peace anytime we want. Thank you.